Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this video, I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction to game development. What is the process, what are the tools involved, and basically just a summary or a gist of what happens while you are making a game. Now see, game development from an outsider's perspective sounds very exciting, sounds very interesting related to the processes because it's related to making games, and we've been playing games all our lives. We enjoy playing games, we get frustrated playing some, but the process of playing games is completely different than that of making games. Now it is definitely a fact that if you are a good gamer, only then you can be a good game developer. But I have seen people who have not played a lot of video games but still are good game developers. Anyway, I think we will touch base on a couple of interesting aspects on why you need to also play games to become a good game developer. But let's get started with a small summary or a gist, as I mentioned, of what game development is exactly. Now, I would say game development is a form of software development because you are primarily writing code, or even if it's a no code based structure, basically when you're not writing a code, just developing games using drag and drop game engines. Even in that case, you are actually essentially creating a piece of software. A software needs to be maintained, so there is a lot of maintenance work that goes into game development cycles as well. But basically, it starts off with an idea. Of course, everything starts off with an idea. An idea by itself is not that important as such in game development. You can have lots of ideas. You can have an idea to make a racing game, you can have an idea to make an MMORPG, but by that idea by itself has no value, no worth. So you basically have to put in work into game development at every stage. Even at the idea stage, you essentially what you need to do is you need to write down that idea on a piece of paper or a Word document or wherever you can, and that process is called as the documentation phase, which is basically the very first step. If idea is your 0th step, then documenting that idea is actually your first step, and I call it as the first step because documenting or writing an idea somewhere gives you a lot more clarity than just thinking about it. I mean, you can have hundreds of ideas, but as humans, we tend to forget a lot of things. And it's okay if you have only 10 ideas. You write those 10 ideas down, you execute them, and I think that is much more better than having hundreds of ideas and not having them written down anywhere. This process, as I call it, as the documentation phase, is also called as the game design documentation phase, when you actually write down your game idea into a piece of paper, and that piece of paper or that document is called as your game design document. It is also abbreviated as GDD. GDD in short stands for Game Design Document, and this has any and every information that there is related to your game that you can think of. Now, this document is not set in stone. Game design documents can also change based on the requirement and based on how the development cycles go. Primarily because sometimes what happens is the game idea that you thought about, when you start making it or when you start working on that idea, at that time you realize that, oh, this is not that fun to play. So you need to kind of tweak around that idea, and you need to add some interesting stuff to it, or change the core mechanic, which brings me to my next point: core mechanic. Now you might be wondering, what do you write in that game design documentation document? The basic things that you need to write down is essentially, of course, your game's title. This can also be temporary. You might not have a working title when you start making your game. That's completely fine. You write down the platforms for which you are going to make. So is it going to be a mobile game, is it going to be a PC game? Then you write down what genre are you making it. Is it a racing game, is it a shooting game, is it a battle royale game, is it an open world game, is it a casual game, is it a hardcore game? All of those terms you can actually research by yourself and write them down in the documentation. Writing down these small details is extremely important, and it gives you kind of a recall to yourself that this is what we are developing. The next thing that you move forward is game mechanics. Now, game mechanics is actually quite interesting to understand, because game mechanics is something that makes or breaks your game. It makes your game fun to play, or it makes your game boring to play. A good game mechanic is something that is one single activity. Now, pay attention to this. One single activity that you would like to do over and over and over again. This actually reminds me a lot about Vas Montenegro. Is his definition of insanity, taken, of course, quoted by Albert Einstein. But I would say that games are a piece of software that make you insane. In the most positive way, it actually rewards you as well. It teaches you a lot of things. In fact, I remember playing Assassin's Creed for the longest time and learning a lot about history, the interest out of my own interest, as opposed to what I did from my school. And I'm not saying that schools are something bad or something. Of course, schools do their job in whatever they do, but I think video games transcend that. They take that one step ahead. So the process is quite interesting. I'm spending a lot of time on game design documentation in this entire video, and that's because that is the foundation of whatever you're creating. And if your foundation is strong, then of course everything else aligns later on, and you will be able to create a game smoothly. I would say spend as much time as you can in building your foundation. This includes writing down your game design document, testing out prototypes, uh, then having all your assets in place and writing good foundational code, because that is exactly what will keep your game sane, right? Although later on your game can do anything for the player base. It can be an addictive game, it can be a chill game that you play around while you're traveling or whatever. But I think a good game's foundation is based on a good and strong game design document, and everything happens because of that game design document. And that game design document is written by someone known as a game designer. Now, there are a lot of roles as well that I will cover in some other video, but essentially what happens is a game designer is sort of like a communicator between two departments, that is your art department and your programming department. And a game designer basically controls, if you would say, like the controller in an orchestra controls the orchestra, right? So the game designer is essentially that person who controls that entire look and feel, or your entire overall game experience. So that is the role of a game designer in a small summary. But moving forward, after you're done with your game design documentation, you move forward to the prototyping phase. Now, I mentioned this word before as well. Prototyping is actually creating the most single fun aspect of your game, the part that I said, which is your core mechanic, right? That one single thing without any external graphics. These can literally be cubes or blocks or whatever your game's purpose serves, right? It need not be visually appealing, but it needs to be having that fun factor in it. If you get that fun factor right in a prototype, then you start creating other assets of your game. Now, these other assets, of course, vary from game to game. You have to first determine if it's a 2D game or a 3D game. If it's a 2D game, then you create all your sprites or images. Sprites are basically images. It's not the cold drink that you might think of. Then there can be some animation frames that you might have. Then essentially your user interface, UI design, UI, UX, and all of those aspects, right? If it's a 3D game, then you of course start creating your 3D models. You create their textures. You create, if you've got characters, then you create their rigs. You create their animation clips, etc., etc., right? So that is the asset creation phase in a small gist. After you're done with creating all your assets, you think that your game is more or less ready to play or ready to launch, then what you do is you start testing. This is the phase where you get in touch with the player base, or you start acquiring your early customers. It need not be that you need to acquire 10,000 users or 100,000 users or a million users. It can very much be 100 users to 50 users who try out your game, who tell you, who give you honest feedback that, hey, this is what I like about the game, this is what I don't like about the game. You as a developer, it's your responsibility to listen actively to the consumers, to your customers, because see, at the end of the day, your game is going to be played by regular humans. You are developing this game for real people to play. So listening to the community is extremely important, because these are the people who will actually guide you, who will tell you, who will be brutally honest with you that hey, this is what is wrong with your game. And it's completely your choice after all. I mean, as a developer, it's your responsibility to listen to the player base. We've actually seen some interesting examples happening in the past where essentially a game turned out to be bad at launch phase, but because the developers listened to the players' feedback, it eventually became a good game. Two of the best examples that I can think of is one is Cyberpunk 2077, which faced a huge debacle at launch, but they listened to the player base and now it's a really good game. The second example that I can think of is No Man's Sky by Hello Games. Even that game suffered a similar fate, wherein there was a lot of hype around the game, and at launch, the game didn't really do well. But Hello Games listened to the players' feedback and they kept on working to make the game better and better, and that's what made the game so interesting to play. So, testing is very important. If you skip testing, then you might be prone to enter into a phase where you might have to take that harsh feedback from actual real players. I mean, for me personally, it's good to have 100, 200 people talking bad about the game and you listening to those and going back to the drawing table, silently working on the game and coming out with an update, or polishing the game to be good at launch phase, rather than rushing a product out and it facing a debacle what Cyberpunk 2077 and No Man's Sky faced. But I think foundationally, what should happen and what was happening, what used to happen back in the day, is all the amazing games that we think of, be it Road Rash, Midtown Madness, Age of Empires, Roller Coaster Tycoon 2, these were finished products. These were finished products that were shipped out in the form of compact discs. And there were no day one updates, there was no concept of that, there were no high speed internet speeds at that time. And I think what is required in today's time is we go back, learn from our ancestors in the gaming industry, and take a page out of their books, out of their playbooks, and include those concepts in the current game development pipelines. So that is essentially a small basic introduction to game development. There are some tools as well. In fact, I think this video can be divided into multiple parts. So this is basically just a small introduction for you to start researching what there is about game development. In the next few videos, I will be highlighting what are game engines, what is game art, what is game programming, what is game design. We saw a small summary of it, but what is game design? How do you come up with a good game design? Right? So all of those aspects we will cover in my channel. But for this video, that's it. I hope you found this information useful. If you did, hit the like button. If you're finding my channel for the first time, hit the subscribe button. I'm a game developer by profession, and I want to create more and more content around game development, answering the most basic questions around game development. That's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care.